Hello YouTube, welcome back to another Wuthering Waves video. Today's guide dives deep into the permanent character banner, showcasing the 5 incredible heroes that you can add to your roster. Full disclosure, all footage and gameplay is from the closed beta. With that said, as someone who has spent hundreds of hours in the game, I hope this cuts down your research time. Let's start off with the legend himself, Calcharo. He isn't just about looking badass, though let's be real, he totally does. Currently, he is the strongest single target electro damage dealer of the game and pairs exceptionally well with Jianxin. Even though his second ultimate requires another party member, he is still able to solo bosses relatively well. His Resonance Chain 4, which is duplicate copies of himself, gives the party a temporary 20% attack boost when you swap him out of combat, which is also called an outro skill in Wuthering Waves. His weakness revolves around slow animations, requiring the player to know when you can swap cancel his skills in and out of combat for optimal performance. The first 2 banners would likely feature Jianxin, which is another electric character, meaning there might not be another electric character in rotation for a while. As I have mentioned earlier, Calcharo is a good pick if you're planning to roll for Jianxin, especially for the endgame content of Tower and Hologram. The only downside now is that you have 2 Electro Powerhouse users, and certain monsters in the game are immune to the same element or take reduced damage. To wrap things up, let's look at the pros. He synergizes well with Jianxin and Yuan-Wu. He has good damage and can solo bosses well. He has 2 ults, the second is an intro skill, crit damage nodes in the skill tree. His 4 dupes gives him 20% attack buff on outro, and he also buffs himself for more damage. Now going over the cons, he has slow animations. You must use skill swap cancel tech to be optimal damage with him, and his parry timing animation is a little bit slower. Now let's have a look at Jianxin. She is a very well-rounded character that I would recommend for beginners because she is the easiest character to parry with, aside from Rover. She also gets iframes during her counter skill, so it's very easy to learn boss patterns with her. Her ultimate is very strong for late game tower challenges due to the vortex capabilities of pulling monsters into one location. Unlike the other 5 stars in the standard banner, her outro skill enhances the next character's ultimate by 38%. Jianxin's main weaknesses resides in low damage output. I would not consider her as a main DPS at all, though they did mention of buffing her on release. While her ultimate is amazing, the other free-to-play option would be Lingyang, whose ultimate works the same way, just a tad bit smaller. You also have Jian, whose ult is capable of mobbing monsters into a single location. Ironically, for a character that is very easy to play, she was hard to master because of her kit, which is why they are making changes to her. I made a video guide about her for those looking to see her max counter parry and chi ball potential. I would not place her at the top of the list unless they buff her in damage wise. Now let's go over her pros and cons. Starting off with the pros, she is an all-rounder character that is good. Her ultimate is a vortex skill that is endgame worthy, the easiest character to parry with. She can also counter skills without taking damage. She's getting buff on release. She has high self-sustain and shielding, which is useful for tower endgame. Her passive nodes give self-crit up. That's also good if they end up buffing her damage even further. Her outrow buff gives 38% damage up for the person that's going in. Her intro has a mini vortex, and she's just a tanky character in general. Now let's have a look at her cons. Her damage output was rather low, and she may get buff on release, as they have mentioned in the developer letter. She's not a main damage dealer. Her ultimate is not that unique. Her kit is too complex for people to play her properly, and she needs dupes if you want to make her a pure powerhouse. And even then, with dupes, I felt like she was still lacking in the damage department. Now let's have a look at Lingyang. He was one of the main characters that I played extensively during the last test. The developer notes said that he is getting some rework because his kit revolves around airtime and people complain about it. He buffs his normal attacks a lot, and he is very easy to practice parrying with. One of the strongest characters when it comes to glacial damage. His RC4 will also give 20% attack boost to the team upon swapping him out of combat. he can be played as a combo master or a heavy attack spammer. He has one of the more stylish playstyles with air combos and such. A lot of people didn't really like the way he was left vulnerable in the air. For one, you can only dodge once in the air compared to being able to dodge twice consecutively on the ground. Also, the iframe of air dodging is extremely short and unforgiving compared to the ground dodging. So I would say it's like 0.5 seconds in the air, and then when you're on the ground you have like a 1 or 2 seconds iframe dodging that will count when you perfect dodge a boss, which is crazy. As much as I have enjoyed playing him in the beta, I felt like he was rather lacking and he would definitely be at the bottom of my list, and I would be super sad if I ended up getting him as a 50-50 on a limited banner. Looking at the bright side, the developers are looking into him, so perhaps he might be better on release? Now let's look at Lingyang's pros and cons. So he has a lot of normal attack self buffs. His RC4 gives 20% attack boost to the team. He's easy to parry with. He is the highest glacier damage character. He's also getting buffed on release. Now, going over the con side, he's getting reworked possibly. His 40 skill is too much airtime. He dances in the air, and he requires precise timing on air evasions. Moving on to the next character, we have Verina, who is an excellent support character that fits well with any team setup. She has a passive skill where if someone were to take fatal damage, it will leave them at 1 HP, helping players clear challenging content easier. She can buff your team with 2 kinds of passive attack buffs and can heal everyone. Currently, she is the best in slot support. She's relatively easy to build because you can just slap 2 random sets on her without leveling up her echoes. Depending on the set echoes, it can further increase your team's overall attack upon swapping her out of combat. She can also parry with her normal attacks, which is very useful for late game content. Ultimately, she is a very solid character, and her healing is also getting buffed on release. Verina has extremely low damage output, and she is not very useful until you hit the end game or harder levels of hologram or tower. Investing resources early in her as a free-to-play will halt your progress because she's not a DPS character. Her role is replaceable by a free 4-star character named Baishi. Also, don't forget that you can use active items such as healing drinks, attack foods, and so much more. She is an excellent choice, assuming that the next few characters in the gacha after Yinlin and Jian will be DPS focused. While she is not required, most of the current endgame content is timer based, and getting buffed in damage helps a lot. She is also very useful in content where you can't use active items in combat, such as the tower. Now let's quickly go over her pros and cons. Starting with the pros, she works well with any team setup. She also has a cheek that's passive, and she can buff the team's attack by 30%. She can heal everyone. She's the best in slot for heals and buffs. Very easy to build with her echoes. She's getting her healing buff on release. Now going over the cons, her damage output is obviously low. She won't be very useful until you hit endgame. The 4-star character Baishi also performs the same concept, except a little bit weaker. Certain areas you can use healing items, which kinda negates her healing purposes. And it's bad to invest in her early on as a free-to-play player due to limited resources. The last character we're looking at is Encore. Encore is the strongest fusion character, followed by Chixia. She is not much of a solo character due to her skills leaving her very vulnerable. However, if you play her well, you can swap cancel characters in and out of combat while she is animation locked. Her RC4 also gives 20% attack boost when you swap her out of combat, along with leaving a puddle of flames on the floor for 6 seconds. The damage done by the lava is quite strong, but it's not very useful with certain bosses that are zooming around the map. She also got nerfed because she can no longer parry attacks with her first few left clicks. If you want to parry with Encore, it's best to do so by using a jump or plunge attack. She can also parry attacks with her ultimate form. Her ultimate charges rather slow, and it leaves her extremely vulnerable during her enraged state. While her damage output is rather high, her full potential requires you to having another party member to swap in and out of combat. Starting with the pros, Encore is the strongest fusion character. Her output is extremely high. Her RC4 gives 20% attack boost on outro. Her outro also leaves a puddle of flames. As for the cons, she can't parry with her normal attacks. You have to use jump or plunge attacks to parry. Her 40 skill requires an immediate swap because it leaves her vulnerable. Her ultimate charge is too slow and the duration is too short, and she's also vulnerable during her ultimate. And that should sum up everything related to the standard characters. My preferred choice from good to bad would probably be Verina, Calcharo, Jianxin, Encore, and then Lingyang last. Calcharo and Encore and Lingyang are all DPS characters and they could be interchangeable depending on which element you like best. Verina would be a best choice right now due to the kind of content that you will experience endgame, and Jianxin is an all-rounder which is also good for endgame, but not so much for hologram. Do keep in mind that some of the characters will also receive buffs on release, so the meta may change then. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight on how a character may perform later on. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Until then, this is your brother, Steparu, out.